Over the past 2 days, we've looked at the strategic and the operational level from our presenters. We've had just a wonderful array of executives here this week, and we've also had great panels, and this will be one that I think you'll remember. At the strategic level and operational level, we had Vice Admiral Gortney. We had Mike Mullen here, who did a tremendous job. We also had Rear Admiral Priebus, who talked to us about the special ops arena. And Lieutenant General Flynn on the joint side gave us a very unique overview yesterday of sort of the way ahead, at the same time the challenges that are out there for our joint forces. And then this morning you heard a fairly emotional presentation from the Undersecretary of the Navy, the Honorable Robert Work. So we're going to transition today because a couple of our topics have been talked about, what keeps you up at night. Well, we've got emerging leaders that have the same things and the same thoughts, and many of them have brilliant and bright ideas, and you're going to hear some of them today. Today, our panel will be moderated by Mr. Dan Moore, who is the Director of International Missile Defense, Raytheon Missile Systems. And without further ado, I'd like to everybody give a warm welcome for this panel. Okay, Dan.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, we're hot. I'd like to acknowledge some people that were instrumental in helping support this panel, but also to create the extraordinary intellectual environment that AFCEA and USNI West 2012 offers. First is Fred Rainbow. I've known Fred for a couple of decades, and once upon a time I was on a panel in uniform up here. Lieutenant Stavridis was part of the panel. Obviously I was one of the slackers. Also would like to acknowledge Frank Hoffman. Frank Hoffman is currently in Secretary Works' office. Frank is one of the great minds in the Marine Corps and now the Secretary of the Navy's office. And then finally, if I were to envision the perfect panel and we were all time travelers, there are three people that I would have up here, and I think they embodied the spirit of the four young officers to my right. First would be William S. Sims, probably the most significant naval officer of the 20th century. He's somewhat obscure because his heroism was in the first half of the 20th century. He increased naval gunfire support by over 3,000%. He helped get the Naval War College into wargaming so that the country was prepared for World War II. And then he also put together convoys and lots of other things. The second all-star panel member would be Jim Stockdale, Medal of Honor recipient, U.S. Navy prisoner of war, president of the Naval War College, and vice presidential candidate. Next, I'd have John R. Boyd, Air Force type, father of the EM diagram, the F-16, and you can read about John in a book by Robert Coram called The Fighter Pilot Who Changed the Art of War. Finally, another more obscure name, unless you're a fighter pilot, Frank Ault. Frank Ault, in 1967, led the Navy's efforts as a captain in the air-to-air missile system capability review that is now called the Ault Report. And that allowed the U.S. Navy in less than 4 years to go from a 2-to-1 kill ratio in the air-to-air war in Vietnam to slightly over an 11-to-1 kill ratio. Each one of those as a JO started out thinking about how they could make a difference and those things their services needed to do to take their game to the next level. And I think we have an opportunity with this panel to do the same. I'm going to put a couple of things on the table just to sort of frame the way I'm thinking about this. And Ed Deming taught us that knowledge is the ability to predict. And the study of networks has taught us that the knowledge is usually at the edge of the networks, while the power is at the center of the networks. So if you want to go find where the knowledge is, you have to go to usually the young people, the young officers, the young NCOs that are at the edge of the network, because they are out there where it's banging into reality, and they are learning the lessons, and they are understanding where the enemy's shortfalls are, where the friend's strengths are, and also where we can change to be much better. So Sims, Stockdale, Boyd, Alt, they took their networks to the next level of performance because a few people in power listened to their knowledge, and as a result, that was to the profound benefit of our armed services in the country. Today's panel live and fight on the edge of the network. They're bringing their knowledge to us. And I have two considerations for the audience as I get ready to introduce the panel. Who in power is listening? And how can we help take our networks to the next level of performance? To my right, and I ask everybody to withhold their questions. What we'll do is each person of the panel will have about 5 minutes for remarks, and then we'll open it up for general questions. First, I'd like to introduce Captain Tony Hatala, U.S. Marine Corps. He's an AV-8 driver, but as we learn in this conflict, he is also now a member of an upgun effort to C-130s called Harvest Hawk, where you're able to take the strengths of a C-130 and begin to use that in today's conflicts. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks, sir. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. One of the most significant problems that junior officers are facing today is a constant stream of priorities that are coming in every day. Our time and our resources are constantly redirected from what we believe to be our main mission, in my case, flying and fixing aircraft, and we get redirected to classes that at best are interesting and at worst tend to be a major distraction from getting the important work done. And this is universally recognized. If you went across the fleet and you talked to 100 different junior Marine sailors and officers, I think they'd all bring this up as a major problem that we're facing today. In Marine Corps fashion, we adapt and we overcome. We'll do more with less, and we end up turning red dots on a spreadsheet green so that it can be reported as the fleet being trained. But at what cost are we doing this? Our buckets can only hold so much water, and so as we add these priorities, which we don't believe to actually be priorities, we're displacing other things. We're stealing time from Marine families, sailor families. We're distracting them from taking care of their personal matters. And at the end of the day, I think this is deficit spending in our human capital. We can surge from time to time to make these things happen, but it ends up costing us in the long run. All of us today are going to bring up some of the problems that we see. We're also extremely interested in solutions. I had a coach that told me, never complain about something if you aren't ready to offer the solution. So for today's discussion, we're excited to be here. We're excited to discuss these issues with you, and it's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Okay. I also meant to mention that Captain Hatala's an undergraduate degree from Brown, came to us via the Officer Candidate School and Marine Aviation Training. Two of our officers came via Northwestern University. The first one is Ben Coleman. Ben went through Naval Aviation Training and is an F-18EF pilot. Interestingly, while he made 2 Navy deployments, He now is a instructor pilot at the Marine Training Squadron here at Miramar. Ben?
Thanks, Captain Moore. I'd like to start by thanking Fred Rainbow for putting this on. It's kind of brave of him to put 4 junior officers up in front of everybody. And also thank Captain Moore. He's been a great mentor of mine for the past 8 years. To start out, I'd like to talk about things that we're doing well. So I think forward deployed, everybody from about the 2-star level below is doing a great job in terms of executing the strategic game plan. Whether it be flying missions off carriers, whether it be clearing out insurgents from houses in Afghanistan or Iraq, for the most part, on the front lines, we're doing things very well and right. Where things kind of go awry is back in garrison. And I really think, to be blunt, that we're not utilizing the capabilities of our junior officers to their full extent. So as I look at my peers around the world of our age, I see people like Mark Zuckerberg, 27-year-old guy, created a $100 billion company. Aaron Schock, 28 years old, got elected to the House of Representatives. Jean Favreau, who's at 27, is the head speechwriter for President Obama. And of course, Tom Brady, at 28, won 3 Super Bowls and multiple MVPs. I think, and also Forbes in the past month published a 30 under 30 article, and not one of the people on that list was active duty military. And that's a shame, because we see SEALs, we see Marines, we see Army personnel and Navy pilots going out and doing great things abroad. They, in their daily activities at 25, 26 years old, have to talk to tribal elders who are decades their senior in a different language, have to disperse millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure funds. And yet when they come back to garrison, they're not able to fully realize their potential. An anecdote that was very telling for me, and actually from a guy in this audience right now, is that when he was 25, he was an aide to the Undersecretary of Defense. And he was working in the Pentagon and would regularly brief 3- and 4-star admirals on strategic decisions. And they would take that information and act on it. Due to some personal reasons, he chose to join the military, and 4 years later, he's now a Lieutenant JG. But putting that uniform on, if you were in the same situation, he'd be relegated to the corner or getting coffee. So it seems like by putting on the uniform, basically military officers are no longer valued. To me, this is simply absurd. Secondly, our broken acquisition process is harming combat effectiveness. And I'll use an example from my own field right now. In 2004, I did my senior honors thesis on JSF and F-22 procurement. At the time, Lockheed and the Defense Department promised that by 2008 and 2010, we would have combat-ready aircraft, and at $16 million per copy. Here in 2012, the JSF is nowhere to be found. At the earliest, it will be produced in 2015, and it'll be at least $150 million per copy with R&D development costs taken into account. I'm flying 25-year-old aircraft getting less than 10 hours per month of flight time, which, if any of you know about the aviation pipeline, is insignificant. We basically need 150 flight hours yearly at the minimum to maintain tactical proficiency. And at 10 hours per month, that's 120 hours. You can do the math. We've talked about these solutions in the junior officer ready room, Marine, Navy, whatever, and we have solutions. For instance, the Marine Corps could potentially have bought Super Hornets to make up for this gap. In addition, if you talk to junior JTACs on the ground, Joint Tactical Air Controllers, what they want overhead are platforms with long on-station time and a lot of ordnance. So the first thing they ask for are Apaches or Cobras. The second thing they ask for are C-130s with gun capability. The third thing they ask for are UAVs. Last on that list is TAC Air. And while we can do our job well, because that's what we have, there are other suitable airframes like the AT-6 or the Super Tucano that could potentially fill a role of a coin aircraft better. Finally, the third thing I'd like to address is the growing gap between military and the civilian. And while a lot of this has to do with the volunteer military, and while we're doing a good job with creating a professional force, we've also brought some of these problems onto ourselves. One of the things is that we've removed ourselves from college campuses and from MBA programs. Micah here had the opportunity to get an MBA from Northwestern, which was a great opportunity for him to interact with some of the best and brightest leaders in our civilian world. One of the things I've found most significant in my military experience was the 4 years I spent at Northwestern in a civilian institution, where I was interacting with future doctors, lawyers, politicians, etc. But recently, the Navy chose to remove funding from sending junior officers to schools like Stanford, Harvard, Northwestern, etc., and instead are putting their students at the Naval Postgraduate School. And while that's a great institution for what it is, it doesn't expose our junior officers to other thought ideas. When we're thinking about military education, we shouldn't just be having education that gets us in the same room with similar minds. We need to be exploring other options, interacting with people who think differently than us so we can come up with new solutions. Finally, who better than the innovation generation to bring us into the 21st century and adapt the requirements we have to current operations? Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Ben. Our next member is a commanding officer of a mining vessel, Lieutenant Commander Micah Murphy. Mike is getting ready to deploy to the Arabian or Persian Gulf, whichever flavor you prefer. And he comes to us from Notre Dame, and I'm not going to say anything more about the football program there.
Hold your applause, please.
That's right, hold your applause. And he also did, as Ben mentioned, he was focused on getting an MBA from Kellogg while I happened to also be there. Over to you, Micah.
Well, thank you, Captain Moore. Let me first start by saying that the last couple of days has been a great educational opportunity, not just from the speakers and the seminars, but also from the conversations that I've had with people here in the audience and beyond, just other conference attendees, as well as going to the different booths. I had no idea some of the great technological advances that are being made right now, and I applaud all of you for making those things and being committed to those to help us warfighters both now and in the future. So when I pose this question to some of my SWO friends, and we tend to overthink things sometimes and are slow to respond, the first thing when they responded to what keeps you up at night was the budget. Just like we've heard from everybody the last couple of days, budget, it's threat to national security. This morning, I was kind of glad to hear that Undersecretary of Work was losing some sleep over it at night because as SWOs, we're already sleep deprived as it is, and we really cannot afford to lose any more than we already do. So after combing through the first responses, I went back to them and said, okay, what really keeps you up at night? That really can't keep you up at night. We need to be more in the operator or in the frontline defense. And it kind of bubbled down to 2 or 3 things from a more tactical frontline perspective. And a lot of it was kind of covered by Tony and Ben previously. But moving forward, and more specifically for me, is the fact that we're deploying in 3 weeks over to the Persian Gulf, and we'll be basically moving over to Bahrain. Now, listening to the news, everybody can see, whether it's from mainstream media or looking at the Drudge Report, you see the reports of new missile firings from Iran patrol boats or shoulder-propelled grenade rocket launchers, and just the volatility, obviously the rhetoric also from their leadership over there. So the first thing that I'm thinking about is what's going to be happening over the next 60, 90 days, 6 months, and a couple of years. That's definitely one thing that's keeping me up personally at night. Second thing is the A-sub-O, or the reliability of some of our major combat systems. The Aegis system, there have been studies going on for the last couple of years about its reliability, specifically as we go from version to version. Are we really getting that much better if our reliability is going down and our technicians on board cannot fix them? If we have to require a subject matter expert to come aboard to help us maintain it and fix it. So it goes against the self-sufficiency model that we're all aspiring to. The third thing is kind of our reliance on GPS and IP services, and what do we do in the event that we have to revert back to the old school way of doing things that many of you grew up to do. I mean, I was the navigator on a ship. I have no idea how to do celestial navigation, and I fear that a lot of the bedrock foundation tactics and knowledge that was there 20, 30 years ago, even 15 years ago, is just not there anymore. So I worry about us losing connectivity and or having satellites, being vulnerable to satellite disruptions and moving forward and fighting our fight. Ben talked a lot about innovation in our times, and I think we're not in a crisis mode by any means, but we do have significant challenges, but from challenges breed the need for innovation, and from innovation breeds opportunity. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Micah. Last, Captain Autumn Swinford, U.S. Marine Corps, 1 deployment or 2 deployments to Iraq. She's also deployed with MU. She's currently the Marine Officer Instructor at the University of Missouri NROTC program.
All right. I want to thank you all for coming to the panel today. Transitioning up from the address that Undersecretary of Work gave, I think there are some of the comments that he gave that I think will dovetail to that nicely. One of the things that he addressed was our secret weapon, which is our personnel. I know that this conference is somewhat technology oriented and defense industry oriented, but the user is that secret weapon. It's using all of your equipment that you produce. And for those of you who are military personnel in the audience, we know all too well how important that secret weapon is. So the two things that I'm going to talk about today are, some of the leadership issues that do take up a lot of my spare time and thought, and have lost some sleep over. The first thing is that force reductions are no secret. We all know that they're coming in both the military and the civilian sides of our services. And one thing that we just don't know how far they're going to go. I mean, we know they're coming. We don't know how far they're going to go. But I do know that service members in particular, even at my level, where I'm bringing in future officers under scholarships to be second lieutenants and ensigns, they are all aware that, in the Marine Corps specifically, at the end of their first tour, right now the career designation rate is about 60%. So six out of 10 of them will be allowed to continue on in active duty service. Even if we stay at the same rate we are now, it could decrease. But 4 of those 10 will be said, we'll be telling them thank you for your service. You can find some other employment. And so for those who, this is their aspiration and they're working hard and they're performing every day, performing well is not going to be good enough. So one of the things that I'm concerned with, it's not necessarily those that leave, but it's those who stay in the service during a time of force reduction, and the impact of that on leaders, on our ability to know their problems and issues. Because I'm concerned that in a time of force reduction, we could breed a culture of secrecy and kind of refresh a zero defect mentality that has been resident in services in the past. And that the progress that we've made in issues like PTSD, suicide awareness, sexual assault, all of these issues that service members are sometimes afraid to bring up for the fact that they will believe that these issues, which can be resolved or treated or dealt with appropriately, that will somehow line them up to, get kicked out the door. And I think that as leaders, we have to be especially aware of the impact of cuts on the people that we keep, and the way that we continue to keep doors open for these issues, for people to feel comfortable raising issues like, I'm losing sleep, I'm having nightmares, I think I've had something wrong, and that they don't believe they're going to be targeted just for that. Because I think that these issues, they snowball into larger problems, and they can become sicknesses within units, and thereby decreasing ultimately our combat capability. So I just think we need to be especially aware of these impacts on those secret weapons that we keep in our services. Additionally, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. There have been initiatives to bring more minority officers into the service, and then the current service reviews on women's roles in combat. These are somewhat controversial issues. Some of them have been resolved, others are still ongoing. But regardless of your opinion on these issues, they bring up the role of a leader in diverse units, dealing with differences among people who are in stressful situations and constrained environments. Now, diversity can become a punchline and a catchphrase and something that, we say, oh, we're going to have diversity training today. Everyone's, more diversity training. But diversity has its value in military service. And we've all, if you've had mandatory training on this subject, you know it. Or if you're interested in the subject, you know all too well the benefits that it can bring, including bringing in new perspectives. And Ben talked about this a little bit as well. It's not just diversity in gender, race, religion. It's also diversity in education and socioeconomic backgrounds and so on and so forth. But when you build a command climate that allows the strengths and the weaknesses to be the focus instead of the differences and similarities, then you can, as long as you're holding everyone accountable to standards, and that is a very important criteria, you produce an environment just by being a good leader in the basics that supports diversity and supports innovation. Now, it is key, and I will emphasize that standards have to be met. They absolutely have to be met. But there are some individuals out there who claim that some of these differences, especially the controversial differences such as a sexual orientation or gender, even when individuals are qualified, is still a detriment to a unit's readiness and their combat effectiveness. Now, some of you may agree with that, some of you may disagree with that, but to me, it begs the question of are leaders prepared to train their personnel to treat each other with fairness, dignity, and respect in accordance with their skills and capabilities and their character and conduct, rather than what is different between them. It's important to do this to fully realize the capabilities that a unit can bring to bear. You know, at the leadership levels, small units, command climate does a lot for that. But I also believe at the institutional level, with some of the policies that we have, we are not capitalizing on all of the talents that the total workforce can bring to bear. I don't think that it's a modern human resource management strategy to make artificial barriers where truly talent and capability should be the true judge of whether or not someone is qualified for a job. So I welcome your questions, and again, I thank you for having us today.
Okay, thank you very much, Captain. The floor is open for questions.
Jeff Wallace and Infinite Dimensions here in San Diego. I sympathize with all of you. As a young Army guy, I funded Mark Andreessen in the invention of the web browser, and obviously that guy made a lot of money off that, and I didn't. So what would be the number one, I'll throw this out to all of you, what would be the number one change that you would like to see to make your lives better in your personnel path?
Just take it in order. You want to, yeah.
Number one change for me, I think you could definitely utilize the junior officers, get their ideas. We don't always have strategic view, but a lot of times we can solve small problems that end up having a strategic impact, I think, on the organization. So form a council of captains, a council of lieutenants, you know, get them together and ask them what is inefficient, what can we do better, and what do you see that you can translate from your friends in the civilian sector or just your interactions, the technology that you use every day. Young people have their finger on the pulse of what's going on, so how can we utilize that cheaply, implement it quickly, and solve the little problems that we see every day in the units?
In terms of career progression, I think the FitRep system and the lack of an adaptable career model is, frankly, a 20th century industrial age model. I've seen in my careers that there have been people promoted because they happen to be there at the right place at the right time. They get their #1 fit rep because they're the most senior person, it's their turn, and people who are more capable don't get the fit rep they deserve. And because they're the first, they've been there for maybe 2 or 3 months, even if they've had innovative ideas in the squadron and actually made an impact, they're put at the bottom of the list. Additionally, with the adaptable career path, in aviation particularly, my first 18 years are scripted for me. I have no options to kind of go outside that scripted career path. If I wanted to go to graduate school, it's almost frowned upon in naval aviation because it takes me out of the cockpit. And while I understand that it's important to maintain flight proficiency, there's no reason why a commanding officer has to have 18 years of service. Why can't he have had 25 years of service? Why can't he have had 10? There are capable officers who can do this. We see this in industry all the time, and we're seeing our generation in particular rising up to challenges and being able to adapt to new technologies, adapt to an accelerating velocity of ideas. And in the military, we're wedded to a 20th century model that needs to be reformed.
I think for me, and this new perspective, is just giving unit level commanders more time to do their own training. We have, you know, the proverbial 120 pounds of requirements that we got to do, but we only have a 100-pound sack to carry it all. So we're constantly trying to meet different wickets, and I think one thing that Tony said is we got that warfare area we're trying to turn from red to yellow to green so that we can appease and move on to the next phase of other mandatory required training. Meanwhile, we don't get a chance to do some of our other, maybe if we wanted to do some more unconventional training, or maybe talk about, you know, going into theater, getting some more cultural training, or time to bring other speakers in, or go on different field trips to do SWO training, go to a CG, go to a DDG. There simply isn't time in the condensed training pipeline to be able to do the type of stuff that I think would add value to members of the surface warfare community.
I think that there should be a more comprehensive review of some of our, as I spoke about, human resource strategies, from job descriptions and the qualifications needed to hold those positions to our performance evaluation models, particularly in the Marine Corps performance evaluation system. There is no opportunity, unless you're going to write an adverse fitness report, which is often looked at as the career killer, to highlight maybe something that can be improved on an otherwise strong performer. I do think it's important to note those, and those can come through performance counselings instead of your performance evaluations. But I do think that it somewhat constricts the ability of evaluators to fully document a service member's performance in a way that can be recognized when it comes to selections and promotions. I think that things to use in the civilian sector, like the 360-degree evaluations where you have subordinates and superiors evaluating performers and peers as well, could be useful. Even if it's just tested and evaluated, we could decide it doesn't work, but I think it's worth looking at because I think it could give us a better evaluation performers, so that it had been talked about promotions and selections for command, et cetera, that we could more fully evaluate those that we're selecting for these positions, not just from the superior perspective, because we all know that your subordinate may have a drastically different opinion than your boss might, and it doesn't mean one's right or wrong, but they're different, and I think they should all be accounted for.
Sir.
Yes, I had a short and easy question before I came up here, and then listening to these comments just provokes me to give a little feedback to you all. I just want to know, are you all members of the Naval Institute? Okay.
Yes.
Because here's why. You talked about the Council of Captains, and let me tell you that there is a Council of Captains. It's proceedings. It's Naval Institute. When Lieutenant Tangredi was Lieutenant Tangredi, my dialogue with the CNO was through that mechanism, and it can be done. But unfortunately, in my time, and I hope it's not your time, there was a lot of peer pressure not to get involved in that stuff because you didn't know what would happen to your career if you did that. And I'm just telling you, there's mechanisms there, and this is one of them. But the question I have two questions. One was for Captain Swinford, because she opened up she was talking about barriers and barriers within this, within the personnel system as far as people moving to the optimum position. And I want to hear more about what the barriers you see. But the other thing, that I wanted to feed back to you was having served a career in the Navy and then working with outside business. Outside businesses aren't more fair about promotion or anything. They're less fair and more arbitrary than the military ever is. The military has a system where it tries to fairly evaluate each individual. That's not the real world. So, and when I were in your shoes, I thought the same way, and now that I'm not in your shoes, I think quite different. But anyway, Captain Swinford, would you talk about these barriers?
Sure.
What are you talking about?
Well, first I'd say that our military services have done throughout history an extraordinary job of following. You could look at racial integration and the successes that we had. I mean, there were difficulties, but ultimately I think it turned to successes. If you look at the history of the Montford Point Marines, which have been highlighted recently for some of their accomplishments, we've done a fantastic job of bringing in divisions within society and employing them with their capabilities and coming out with successes. Particularly, the barrier that I see right now, and I don't want to be looked at as a complainer because I am a part of this interest group here, but there is currently a study on the role of women in combat. And there will be decisions made on whether to open certain assignments or occupational fields to women that are currently closed. For example, one of the barriers that I have faced myself is I was assigned to a logistics battalion, and we were on a deployment with a infantry battalion, and there was a decision to deploy a support det to be forward with that infantry battalion and live at a forward operating base. Now, I had done 7 months as a motor T platoon commander leading convoys through Fallujah in 2006. Okay? I had experience in a tactical environment. And at that point had been an experienced junior logistician, fully capable of this job. When the decision came up who to assign to the role of the support deck commander, and my battalion commander nominated me, that I want to send Swinford out there, the response was from some of the leadership in the combat arms side, I think Swinford's a damn fine logistics officer, but I can't handle my men's heads turning every time she comes in a room. She's a distraction. Now, I understand that. I understand some of the social divisions and the way that our culture could make that true. However, when I talk about it being a leadership challenge, what I see is that that leader had an opportunity to say, Swinford's a damn fine officer, and we will include her and employ her with her capabilities, and it'll make this mission better. But that's not what happened. So it's not a complaint, because I did end up with a great opportunity. They ended up taking my boss, a major, instead of a first lieutenant, and employed him in that job. And I became the operations officer for my battalion. And I had a great opportunity. And by and large, I have had great opportunities and have not seen any true barriers to my progression as an officer. But that is one example, and it's not even in that case, wasn't even an institutional barrier that limited the ability for, in my opinion, I'm not just trying to pump myself up here, but in the opinion of my battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel logistician, the best person for the job.
But was that the leader, or was that the system?
In this case, I believe it was the leader. I think it definitely could have happened, and they ended up sending women to that base eventually, because out of necessity. They needed a surgeon there for one of the trauma teams, and it happened eventually out of necessity.
Yeah, that's why I applaud you for the earlier comment when you said the basic leadership. Basic leadership solves those problems.
Yes.
Usually when those problems aren't solved, there's something lacking in the basic leadership. So thank you for your service.
And not to stay on this topic too long, but I just want to address that it is institutional as well. Assignment of, for me, I can't be assigned to be a logistics officer in an infantry battalion. Like I said, I spent 7 months running convoys in Fallujah. How am I not qualified for that? I don't have an answer for that satisfies me.
Thank you. Just a minute. Captain Hatala would like, Sam, first of all, Sam Tangretti, thank you for your continued support of the Naval Institute. I've always enjoyed your thoughts and contributions there to include this forum. Captain Hatala would like to address your question as well.
Yes, sir. I'd like to respond. As far as the Council of Captains, I appreciate that the Naval Institute is a great venue for getting ideas out on a bigger level. And my comment was more directed toward smaller unit leaders. So at the MAG and wing level, I'd love to be able to give honest feedback directly to the commander in a respectful way on actionable items. And I think the real value that we see, maybe it's the impatience of our generation. I think there are a lot of times when we could put these solutions in place. We recognize problems, and we could put solutions in place today, this week, this month, as opposed to writing a letter that would then come from the top back down. And as far as companies in the civilian world, I think what we're attracted to are the younger entrepreneurial companies. And I recognize that there's bureaucracy wherever you go, but the companies that are stealing my friends from the military, the ones that are really attracting them, are the dynamic ones where there is opportunity and it is based on purely merit. Thank you, sir.
Sir, could I address?
Oh, yep.
Just
One more time. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Just to carry on with the Naval Institute thing, I think a model to follow for that Council of Captains is Admiral Stavridis stood up cells of innovation that were made up of 03s, 04s, and he had direct contact with them. You know, he would take their advice and actually implement some of those ideas. I think that's brilliant. I talked to Secretary of Work yesterday, and he mentioned an admiral in the Pentagon who would regularly bring in 6 or 7 junior officers from the submarine community and pick their brains about what was going on in the submarine community directly and resolve that. And just to go on with that a little bit further in the civilian world, a company like Google, and they allow their employees 10 to 20% of their working hours to come up with innovative solutions. They can be off the wall, they can be crazy, and they're an extremely successful company. I mean, we should be leveraging the ability of our junior officers to come up with off-the-wall, wacky ideas that could be, tactically significant, strategically significant, and then have a forum for them to be listened to. And while the USNI and proceedings is a great venue for that, I think personal interaction and the one-on-one conversations are the more important and are more effective.
Okay. You're up.
It's been a recurring theme in the conference about pushing jointness down, and when people are serving forward in modern wars, you're expected to integrate with many, many different types of units, different agencies. civilian organizations, local organizations, very, very difficult tactical environment. You guys have complained, and believe me, I feel you on this, about not having the authority at your level. I mean, people want to, at the junior officer level, you want to control your assets so that you can best execute your own mission, whether it's maintaining your own schedule about training and what's important to you in training, or what you're actually fighting. I worked at JIDO for 3 years. We were reach back support, right? We're on the bat phone. You guys call us up when you need something that you don't have the assets organically to do. When you guys were forward, were you aware of those types of reach back assets? Given that you don't own them and don't control them and can't task them except by this sort of, remote way, did you feel like they were responsive to your needs? Did they help you execute your own leadership within a box, or would you rather have those assets organically with you so that you feel like not a decentralized command structure of which you suffer, but a centralized command structure that you own? It's a bit of a roundabout question here, but I stood around for a long time thinking about it.
I don't have any specific experience that relates to that from my last deployment. I am getting ready for another deployment, and I know we have civilian help that we can reach back to. So we have both on-site and support back home that we can call. So I'm not sure how to answer your question. I think they're both very valuable and probably situationally dependent. And as far as what Ben was saying earlier, I think when we are forward, we are able to make those decisions. It's one of the big gripes is when we're back home, we're not trusted in a similar way.
I do have some experience with newly fielded equipment, or especially technologically advanced equipment, where we've had civilian contractors deploy with us when I was with the Marine Expeditionary Unit, but also while I was based in Fallujah, MRAPs coming out, and we did deal with some maintenance issues with that had to be sorted out with the quick fielding. But I have often found that the civilian sector, when we do have equipment like that where we need civilian assistance, has been just as, if not more, responsive in a lot of cases to our problems and moving at a faster pace than maybe the regular supply chain or systems allow on the military side.
Yeah, from the mine warfare community, it's been something that's come up as of fairly recently, is we have only a few number of subject matter experts for our different combat systems, and they have been doing a better job, and there is plans in place to move those civilian tech reps forward, as well as do more integration with our aviation, the AMCM triad in there, so work on lines of communication, how we're going to operate together. And then the third part of that is not just the knowledge and the interoperability, but the logistics support and the lead time. That's really what drives a lot of things, is lead time, or specifically lag time, for us to get the parts and the people over there when we need them. So I think moving things forward, as long as you have some sort of economies of scope and scale, is going to help us tremendously.
In aviation, as I mentioned, forward deployed, we do things very well, and I think Boeing and the other tech reps are very helpful for when we have engine problems and anything like that. They're there 24 hours a day on the ship with us and able to give us support that we need.
Also, have you guys considered a model similar to lessons learned, the Marine Corps lessons learned or Army lessons learned, for pushing up your ideas, or for at least making them available for people who are willing to consider them?
Absolutely.
Interesting you brought that up. I've actually submitted about 5 ideas, and I didn't hear anything back.
Yes, sir, you're next.
Good morning. I'm Brian Ferguson. I'm also a junior officer like the folks in front of me. It strikes me, it's interesting. I walked in this morning, there's a couple hundred booths downstairs, and I can't imagine the amount of money that just goes into renting the entire convention center. So that tells me there's an incredible amount of people involved in this whole organization this morning. And this panel is phenomenal, and Captain Moore, I know that getting this on the agenda took some time. And as you mentioned, Captain Moore, that on the periphery, you said that knowledge is really with junior officers on the periphery and so to speak, boots on the ground. And I'm every day humbled as a junior officer by my contemporaries. It blows my mind, having been at war for 10 years in this country, the kind of people that are choosing to sign up and serve as officers. Really, I say it without a doubt that it's the best leaders this country's ever seen. And what amazes me is that in this room, here we are in a small room, with 50, maybe 100 people, and I saw one admiral who took the time to come up here and join us. And then there's a number of foreign militaries But how come this, are we culturally, I guess my question, how do we change that culture? I mean, Ben had some great observations about junior officers in the military. And just the access of information and the amount of information that junior officers are bringing back from the field, from the sea on a day-to-day basis. How do we change the culture so that this kind of thing is a plenary? I mean, if I were a leader, I were one of those guys downstairs with a booth, I would want to ask these guys the questions because I know where they're coming from. I know that they know the problems. And granted that in today's military culture, it's not just junior officers who have problems and can offer solutions, but they certainly have the best perspective. And so from a cultural perspective, I'd kind of throw it out to all you guys. It's more of an observation, but just be interested to hear what you think and how we can strategically today have more of a voice amongst junior officers and perhaps more importantly, more of a central role, both from decision makers in the military, but those outside the military who are spending tens of millions of dollars trying to solve our problems.
Thank you. Just want to take that in order.
I'm going to pass for a moment.
Okay.
I think it's a good point. I don't know how to like get junior officers to be, and this is what I'm talking about in terms of leveraging the innovative abilities of junior officers. I'm not really sure how to break into the bureaucracy or how to get admirals to come to forums like these because obviously they're very busy. They have an important job to do. Obviously they're running wars and all that. That's a great question. I don't know.
Actually, I will hop in if you don't mind. Sure. So I think the first thing is just that we recognize that it's out there, that the resource is available. That's the first and most important part. And then, you know, as we go through our leadership training and as you take command, that's just emphasized as something that's out there, that it's okay that you can ask questions 2-3 levels down. And we see this once in a while, but I mean to do it, that it's actually done on a more formal level where it's regular that captains are asked to come into the colonel's office and talk frankly, what are the problems, you know, without fear of retribution. So I think that's the solution. Recognize it and then actually start integrating that into normal practice.
I think kind of out of necessity, I have to reach down quite a bit because even though I'm only 33 years old, you still have guys who are younger, and in this information age, they're much more savvy and can understand the science behind some of our systems much better than I can. So I think a lot of it is just out of necessity and by proximity and availability because they're there. I can just go down a flight or two of, you know, a couple of ladders and be there and talk to them and interface, do that face-to-face connection, which is so much more palatable and effective than I think submitting a response or an email that's got no face and necessarily no passion, you know, behind it. It's hard to get that interaction. That you can't replace that type of human interface. But at the same time, as the leader, I rely heavily on my subordinates to be able to teach me, things, and you have to be open to it and have an atmosphere that's not that's approachable, really.
Well, I was here for one of the panels yesterday, the Information at Sea, What Do Warfighters Need, titled something like that. And one thing that I noticed was not a lot of warfighters in the room. So that's one of the problems. One of the other issues is that the questions and answers I felt like didn't truly address what I believe a warfighter is, which is someone like me, someone like the people at this table, someone, you know, a lance corporal, a sergeant, petty officer, seaman. And not that the answers and questions didn't impact them, but when we talk about the needs of the warfighter, what I expected were, you know, we want to be able to do this. This is a system that doesn't work. I need these two to talk. I need these systems to talk to each other. I need more interoperability. I need this. I need that. And I feel like by having more warfighters in the room, we can more effectively address those issues. So it's getting people like us more involved, us and our peers. And then also, and I see Cole here about to ask a question. He asked a question yesterday about how to get the engineer and the warfighter together. Now, in my experience, and this was particularly when I was on Marine Expeditionary Units, we had companies send out civilian personnel to be with us and to test and evaluate different systems and to really get our face-to-face input from the user level on what works and what doesn't. And while there were times I thought that was an annoyance when I was just trying to get my job done, in the end, I think that we came out with some good inputs, even if that answer was, I don't need this. So getting more uniformed personnel, warfighters involved in these discussions, and then also getting that engineer or tech or that representative to interface with that warfighter as they're doing their job to try to narrow the gap and cut through maybe some of the bureaucracy that we've discussed.
Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Vice Admiral Byrd. You've taken the time to come out here and all the way from the Pentagon. And I think one of the challenges, having spent time in the Pentagon and having had the privilege to work at the 4-star level as a lieutenant commander, and I was retired as a captain. I think information and time overload on our senior Navy leaders probably is as challenging as it's ever been. And for this panel, one of our challenges is how do we burn through that information and time overload because it's hard. Just walking in here, I don't know why anybody would want to come to the banner out there that just had my name, and I would have come to the JOs. What keeps them awake at night. So, Admiral Byrd, thank you very much. And Sam, I think you're right. One of the ways we can do that is through this forum, and Ben and this group actually have an ongoing group that are addressing these issues on their own. It's self-organized, and it's multi-military and multi-civilian, and I think that's part of the answer as well. Sir, you're next.
Yes, good morning. I'm Petty Officer Goth here. I actually work on Admiral Severus' staff. I got the job for him because I blogged for the Naval Institute and because I contacted him across social media. I'm kind of a little bit surprised that, and I'm 30 years old as well, by the way, so I'm kind of surprised that age-wise, peers, none of y'all are mentioning any of the forums online. Small Wars Journal, the USNI blog, any of the other more civilian-esque naval blogs that are out there. These networks, these flat organizations, albeit ad hoc, exist. One name that comes to mind is Lieutenant Commander Armstrong, who's made major inroads into being able to engage with people more senior to him that he's never even met face to face, but his opinion is listened to and heard because he gets himself out there, he gets himself published. My boss, the Admiral, goes ahead and says you need to read, think, and write. The writing is the most important part. So I'm just interested in knowing, how do you guys work towards making a flat organization within your commands so that you guys can engage laterally and even downwards with your personnel to come to a common understanding of where we need to go as we get older and become more senior in the services? And then also how you guys try to attempt to make inroads to engage with those that are senior to you that maybe you haven't met face to face.
I think that's a great point, and that is a great way of getting word out. But kind of going back, these problems still exist, and they've been written about many, many times, whether it's the way we allocate our budget or the training. These are well-known problems that have been disseminated widely and often on these forums, and the change isn't happening. So as far as the big problems that affect the whole organization, I think quite a bit has been written about those, and it is important. It's got the issue out there to be discussed. The problem still remains at the lowest levels. As far as in our local command level, we don't have a wing blog or a forum like that. That is an interesting idea, and maybe we can take that back and see if we could get one going. I like the idea. I'd like to also do it face-to-face and on a continuing basis, but I think that's a good point.
If I could just jump in one more time, where you just said that the same problems have existed for all time, people wrote about it years ago, I totally agree with you. I know exactly what you're saying, sir. So one thing I've kind of developed on my own and moving forward is that, all right, yes, these problems do exist, especially when I was a very junior sailor, a seaman. They seemed insurmountable, and it blew my mind that anybody would allow these things to just perpetuate throughout all time. But as I've become more senior, I've realized that, yes, these problems do exist, but maybe they only exist in the junior person's mind. So as you guys have matured, as you guys have become more senior in leadership, has that perspective come about in your minds as well? I mean, do some of these problems exist only in junior people's mind, and then as you become senior, you see a wider swath of the issues that face us, and you're like, well, yeah, it sucks, but that's why it sucks. There's a reason for it.
Absolutely, and I think you're right. I absolutely acknowledge that senior officers and senior enlisted personnel, that they do have a different perspective, and there are times when, you know, a parent telling his child to eat vegetables, well, it's doesn't seem like a good idea to the kid. Ultimately, it is. So I appreciate that. However, we also see waste that I think after a while you get desensitized to it. So as officers and enlisted personnel move up the ranks, eventually it's just the cost of doing business, and I don't think it has to be. So I'm worried about that. I keep a journal. I want to retain that perspective that I had when I was a second lieutenant. I came in, and I was shocked at some of the waste I saw.
Speaking about the writing part, I do blog on a regular basis, and I do read those other Small Wars Journal and the USNI stuff, and it's good stuff. It's just, for me personally, it wasn't the form I wanted to do it in, because the things I wanted to talk about would not be conducive to that environment. And as Captain Moore was talking about, the group we have, Disruptive Thinkers, brings together junior officers, somewhat senior officers, entrepreneurs to come up with these solutions. And because we haven't been able to do so on our own, we're kind of going outside the system and doing our best to come up with solutions. And I think you're spot on, though. We have to start making more forums to voice our opinions and actually get senior officers to read these things. I look at the number of comments in all those articles are some like 3 or 4 comments, which means not a lot of people are reading those. So while they're a great resource, the penetration is not out there for what it has to be. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I think I have just two responses to your questions. First is that, kind of goes without being said, but when you write and put yourself out there, you're also putting yourself at risk. And we like to think that you're not going to be held liable or thought less of for ideas or opinions that you have, but there's that perception that it might be reality. The second thing is what a lot of people forget, and some people or engineers in this room, is that we really don't have that fast of internet access, nor do we have a lot of CPUs on board. I got 85 guys, and we have probably 15 maybe working laptops or workstations. And then when we go out to sea, it's extra slow. But I probably have somewhere between 12 and 15 databases that we have to upload and log stuff into, at least on a monthly basis. So our time on the computer is already, kind of maxed out, and it takes away from our time to be able to go out and do those face-to-face things. And then when you get that frustration of connectivity and lack of access, it just kind of compounds that problem.
Your first part there, sir, about concern about some blowback about what maybe somebody might publish. There is a lot of talk online about, well, do you have to publish under your real name, or can you publish under a pen name? And older generations seem to be very fond of, you have to publish under your own name, especially for the officers. I personally started blogging under YNSN. I had a pseudonym, and I started writing that way. A few bloggers became fond of me, and then as I finally got the invite to blog for the Naval Institute, I went ahead and said, all right, I'll use my own real name. So do you think there would be more participation? Do you think the debate would be more robust? And do you think it's necessary to allow people to assume a pen name when going ahead and discussing ideas online?
I don't think it's a necessity, and I think you should be able to stand behind your convictions and what your opinions are. So while it might, I think on the fringes, I think it'll lower your inhibitions and allow more people to communicate. But that type of stuff, maybe that's not, if they're not willing to put their name to it, maybe I, for one, am less likely to read it and take a lot of credence to it if they're not willing to put their name on it.
And I think the best way to get people to participate, sorry, sir.
That's all right.
The best way to get people to participate is to respond. So if action is taken after an article or a series of articles, if the topic continues and there's action, then I think that encourages people to actually write and put themselves out there.
Well, and I just want to say one thing on that. I saw a great example of this in the Marine Corps Gazette within the past year. There was a series of articles written by some captains and majors, and General Neller came down and wrote a response to it, published in the Gazette, addressed the issues in a very thoughtful way that considered both perspectives. And so that is an example of how this can work in a publication that is, at least among the Marine Corps, fairly widely read.
Okay. Sir, you're next, and I'll note that we are going over our time. However, I show that the next panel is 30 minutes from now. So unless Mike or somebody from the Naval Institute puts the hook on me, I'll build in a 15-minute cushion between us and the next panel. Okay. Sir. Sir. So we'll try. I don't know that we can get to everybody, but we're going to give it a good shot. Sir.
Steve Wentz, contributor for the blog War is Boring. A question for the panelists. First, do you all have smartphones?
Yes.
How did you go about learning to use them?
Apple made it intuitive.
Yeah. Apple.
So in this case, it was the vendor who had done all the human interface work for you. Was there any knowledge gained through peer question? How do I do this? Oh, how do you do that?
Once or twice, or looking up maybe iPhone tricks on the internet. I mean, that's it.
Does that experience inform you as to the kind of knowledge curation that I think you're talking about, where we have a great deal of very practical knowledge at the network edge? How can we curate this knowledge and get it out there if written documents are time-consuming, digital documents are not accessible? Is there a way, is there a strategy for going beyond the lessons learned to archive, curate, and distribute and share this in an effective manner?
As far as, this is probably just a little bit off. Someone once told me training is a crutch for poor design. So I think as far as all these systems, if we put more time into user interface and we're just thoughtful about it, there are answers out there. There are companies that do it every day. Apple is a great one. It doesn't take any training, as you said. So I think we need to focus on being thoughtful on how we're putting these training systems together.
I really like your questions, and I hope we can capture those as some of the barriers to the communication issues that and the learning issues here. One more person, and then you're next over here. Ben, do you want?
Oh, no.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Monica Pierce from Lockheed Martin. I have actually first thing real quick to Commander Murphy, go Irish, and that's all I'll say about that. 2 questions, if time permits. First, expanding on the question of gaining the junior warfighters, junior officers' feedback and input on systems and the end user. Captain Swinford gave a good example a little bit earlier, but from my perspective in business development at Lockheed Martin, what can industry do to kind of create that pull on your leadership, who is our customer, to make your input more important and kind of help you in that endeavor? And then the second question, just a more personal question, you mentioned, a few of you mentioned your counterparts, some of them leaving for attractive alternative careers in industry and civilian life. What keeps you personally committed to your career in the service?
To answer that first question, I think it's a great question. You say to the senior officer, procurement officers, bring 6 JOs in to help us design the next fighter airplane.
Definitely.
What do they want? What do the guys on the ground need? What are the operational things? To answer your second question, I love flying. I mean, flying is the best thing ever created, and that's what keeps me in. But the career model that we have right now, because I see so many opportunities in the outside world, I don't know if I'm going to stay in. I mean, I'm on the fence right now. And I know it's dangerous to say that because, you know, some commanding officers say, oh, you're on the fence, I'm not going to rank you as high. But you know what? There are a lot of good things about the service and a lot of things that I want to pursue elsewhere. I don't know, if there were more opportunities to go outside the written career path and thrive in an environment where entrepreneurial activity is smiled upon, then, you know, I'd want to stay in. But ultimately, it's the people that keep me in and the flying.
Captain Swinford, what's going to keep you in? You've made that decision.
Well, you know, about a year ago, I had in my mind, I had decided to leave after I finished this tour, which I will complete this summer and then move on. But I had an experience at Officer Candidate School. I was working there as temporary staff last summer, and just watching these young candidates, these future wannabe second lieutenants, go through the process and look up at you and just want feedback. They just want to know if what they're doing is right or if it's wrong and how they can do it better. And that sounds corny, but it's absolutely what drew me to change my mind. Looking at them and saying, you know, growing up as a junior officer and growing into being, you know, no one talks about senior captains, but you know, about senior captain now, my perspective is quite different than it used to be as a second lieutenant, first lieutenant, and a young captain, where I do now see myself as more capable of taking on a true mentor role, not only in leadership, but also in tactics and operations, and to use my knowledge and experience to better those who are coming ahead, because they're just hungry to know the right way. And some of them learn it the hard way, and sometimes that's a good thing, but to be there to encourage and shape them, and to also, what we talked about, to be free thinkers, to be innovators, and to not be constrained by boxes. If officers like us don't stay or leave and still try to influence the Department of Defense, well, then we'll keep having these problems, which have, junior officers have been complaining about these issues in some form or another for forever. So.
Thank you. Sir?
Hi, my name's Cole Krumholtz, former naval officer, and I've been out in Silicon Valley working on startups for a few years. I've been sort of out on the exhibition floor and listening to, for example, SPAWAR briefings, and I've heard a lot about requirements documents, capabilities, roadmaps, et cetera. And my question is, if you've had a chance to read some of those requirements documents, do you feel like those reflect what you're seeing on the ground? Do you get a chance to participate in developing those requirements documents? And if not, what do you think is the right way to close that gap? That's my question. Thanks.
I can just say in my 11 years, I've never really seen one. They don't really go necessarily. Now, I can't say that some of my lead technicians haven't seen them and had a little bit of input, but as far as from a division officer, department head, XO, or captain, I've never once been asked or been shown one.
For my current project, they're doing a pretty good job of actually connecting us, and this is a very unconventional program. The Harvest Hawk was fielded extremely rapidly. It was outside. It's not a program of record. They've done a good job for the most part. We have problems, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, the solutions that are rapidly adaptable are the best. The ones that take 20, 25 years to create that really were built well beyond our ability to predict what the threat's going to be are the ones that usually go off track.
Okay, I've been told that we have to stop formally, but what I'd like to propose to the two gentlemen that are waiting, that immediately following this, we'll assemble over there in the hallway and answer your questions in order, and if anybody else would like to join us, you're welcome, if that's all right. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.